As part of this Cloud Lunch and Learn Marathon session, I'll take you through an overview of Azure VMware Solution so you have a better understanding on how to position the service either in your own environment or on behalf of a customer. My name is Shannon Keene. Yes, it's pronounced Keene, and I'm a Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. I work on community outreach for enterprise cloud adoption, and one of the platforms I spend a great deal of time talking about is Azure VMware Solution. I've been full-time Azure since 2016, and I don't see that trend changing as time unfolds. I've worked with a lot of different customers to get them comfortable, and now I'm working in that broader community base to hopefully help skill up the enterprise adopters of cloud and help that transformation be a little easier. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter or connect with me on LinkedIn, these are the ways to find me. I love connecting with folks in the community to answer questions, brainstorm about Azure architecture, and help guide or demystify the cloud so it's easy to embrace as time moves forward. So let's start with an introduction and background for the Azure VMware Solution service. In talking with customers, we see a variety of migration drivers and triggers that determine their cloud path. Especially over the last year with COVID, we've witnessed a second wave of digital transformation sweeping every company in every industry. Organizations have risen to new challenges, including distributed workforces, increased need for business continuity, elastic demand, and growing pressure to innovate and compete with a new wave of startups. At the same time, organizations still face the challenges of legacy infrastructure, platform incompatibilities, and vast compliance requirements. As we look to help customers build their own digital capability to drive resilience and growth, we've seen for some businesses there are persistent challenges that we hear time and time again. There's the need to migrate to the cloud quickly or to expand capacity rapidly. Then there's the need to reduce costs, complexity, or the risks associated with large-scale projects, and the importance of minimizing having to create new processes using the people and skills the enterprise already has. Digital transformation surrounds four distinct pillars: rehost, refactor, re-architect, and rebuild. I used to joke with customers, it's the 4 R's, so to speak. It's not straightforward to move from left to right, so our goal has been to provide as many options to customers as possible. This helps ease the digital transformation needs of each company. Microsoft now offers Azure VMware Solution as a rehost option, whereas it was only IaaS before. AVS sits on dedicated hosts, so the entire platform falls underneath the Azure dedicated side of our engineering house. This means those servers are dedicated to you as compared to IaaS environments, which are virtualized servers living in a shared environment, and they're logically separate. AVS is different. I think every customer wants to get to the far right as fast as possible, but sometimes that just isn't easy. Maybe there's a commercial off-the-shelf application that doesn't seem to be getting any new cloud-based development cycles, or maybe a company's proprietary application will take some time to unravel as the original developer doesn't work at the company anymore. Technical debt is hard and ever-present, even within the most robust and sophisticated IT environments. The beauty is you don't need to stall everything out in order to be agile and adopt cloud. AVS can help. Azure VMware Solution delivers a comprehensive VMware environment as a service, which allows customers to run native VMware workloads on Azure. Customers can now migrate VMs directly from on-premises to Azure, landing on bare metal, purpose-built, hyper-converged dedicated nodes to run your VMware VMs in Azure exactly as they run today in the hypervisor you both know and love, VMware. It's definitely the dawn of a new age. Customers can now seamlessly run, manage, and secure applications across VMware environments and Microsoft Azure with a common operating framework. Customers will be able to capitalize on their existing VMware investments, skills, and tools, including VMware vSphere, vSAN, and vCenter, while using the scale, performance, and innovation of Azure. Azure VMware Solution delivers a VMware-based private cloud in Azure. These private clouds are built from clusters of dedicated bare metal hosts and are deployed and managed through the Azure portal. Clusters in private clouds are provisioned with VMware vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, HCX, and NSX software. AVS private cloud hardware and software deployments are fully integrated and automated in Azure. One thing to note is this is not our first time building bare metal and purpose-built solutions for Azure services. Along with AVS, we offer bare metal solutions for SAP, Cray, Nutanix, NetApp, and SkyTab. Using purpose-built bare metal infrastructure allows customers the ability to scale, operate, and not have to compete with a shared environment. Sometimes that proves to be problematic. Given the complexity of these advanced workloads, it made sense for Microsoft to spend some time building bare metal solutions for customers looking to migrate some of these applications and workloads into Azure. For those who followed our announcement late last year, we reached general availability with Azure VMware Solutions in 4 regions to start. Those regions were US East and West, as well as Europe West and Australia. Today, we have capacity and capability of deploying Azure VMware Solution in 10 Azure data centers globally, extending to Canada, the UK, Japan, and Singapore as well. We will continue global expansion with more locations coming online soon. Stay tuned for more information on these regions. So AVS helps enterprises out with the built-in continuity, speed, and scale placed on modern infrastructure. Companies get to use existing VMware investments, skills, and tools. So that means companies can transform at a time and pace that's right for their IT staff. Using AVS also helps modernize applications over time because the first hurdle of getting your environment into Azure has already happened. Similar to the skilling conversation, you can take on modernization at a time and pace that's right for your staff. AVS also offers compelling pricing discounts for Windows and SQL Server. As we've touched on, one of the most important things for customers is how easy it is to get started on their migration journey with AVS. On the far left, we've got use cases. So that's everything from data center expansion, reduction, or retirement, to gaining some speed and simplification of migration in terms of placing everything on AVS and Azure. Then there's the conversation of thinking through a disaster recovery or business continuity scenario. AVS might be a good fit in that regard. Then there's the application and business modernization, the dev and test workloads as well. The evolution moves from left to right. Next comes the planning and deployment, where you can take a look at the Microsoft and VMware partnership. You can lean on specialists, programs, partners to gain some agility and some speed related to your migration into Azure. You can create the AVS software-defined data center within a few hours. It's a very straightforward process. From there, you'll think through a migration scenario where you'll connect AVS and the VMware on-prem environment together. You'll use VMware Hybrid Cloud Exchange, or HCX, to quickly migrate VMs. You'll be able to visualize resources in Azure and also be able to continue to manage resources using vSphere. It's a great compromise if you're thinking about a digital transformation. When you move further to the right, you get to the manage and operation side of things. There's the elasticity and scale of Azure. Microsoft has a number of industry certifications. You can think about building additional workloads in other platforms as well, so you can think about increasing high availability, DR, and backup. And then you also have capacity to use the low latency ExpressRoute solution. The best part, though, is you can also use your VMware tools. So there's the native vSphere experience. Then there's vSAN for storage, NSXT for networking, HCX for migration, and everything lives underneath VMware Cloud Foundation, which is essentially vSphere. It's a pretty interesting and compelling story if you're thinking about trying to speed up a digital transformation effort within your company or for a customer. When we talk about modernization, once you get your environment into Azure, it's literally like achievement unlocked. You gain access to a lot of great features and resources that you wouldn't necessarily have access to if you didn't have your environment closer to the ARM APIs. So you can think about centralizing your API management. You can think about the hybrid hub and spoke model from a networking perspective. You can onboard Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor. You can also even think about storage optimization. Really, once your environment gets into Azure, the sky's the limit. Let's step through the new and differentiated features because we did have a first version of this service a number of years back. So if you think about this, it's a first-party Azure service that's cloud certified by VMware. It's a very different time in our lives when you think about the fact that VMware and Microsoft have partnered up to provide this for customers who are thinking about moving their environment into Azure. There's a seamless Azure experience and native integration. Once you get your environment into Azure, you gain access to all of the Azure services. You can use Azure Hybrid Use Benefit for Windows and SQL Server. You also gain free extended security updates for your Windows and SQL servers that are living on older operating systems. So the 2008 and 2008 R2 era for both Windows and SQL Server. Microsoft is your single point of support. If you have an issue with your AVS environment, what you will do is you will open up a support ticket with Microsoft. Microsoft will troubleshoot all of the Azure components. And then if there's something with VMware that needs to be troubleshot, Microsoft will reach out to VMware on behalf of you to work in conjunction for a full resolution. Engineering will provide the latest VMware technology updates. You don't have to plot out when you need to patch, when you need to update. Microsoft will take care of that for you. HCX Advanced comes with AVS. The Enterprise Edition is available if you need more site pairings. You gain access to high-performance dedicated hosts. They are your own servers. There's a unified licensing and consumption model as well. You don't have to go to multiple portals to try and figure out exactly what you're consuming and what you're using. And then the really cool feature here is there's a Simplified Nsx Interface as well. As of right now, these are the different software and hardware specifications. So if you and your company decide to move forward with AVS, you'll gain the specific software specifications on the left, and then the hardware specifications on the right. That's the SKU that we use for AVS, and that's everything you would gain by deploying the solution. The math is called out at the bottom of the slide. In order to provision an AVS instance, you need to have 3 nodes per vSphere cluster. There's a maximum of 16 nodes per vSphere cluster. And then there's a maximum of 96 nodes to an Azure Private Cloud instance. So these are the solution features. You have the familiar VMware technology. So you've got things like native vSphere support, the fully featured networking stack, vSphere management, vSAN, and NSXT. And then you've got HCX Advanced or Enterprise to help support the migration. Then there's the full integration with Azure. You've got the Azure management and governance tooling, the security tooling, low latency connectivity to Azure. You can use the Azure ecosystem. There's a single point of support, and then there's the DevOps toolchain that you can integrate with to help modernize and automate your deployment. When you think about the high-performance cloud infrastructure, you get the optimized elastic infrastructure. There's the automated self-service provisioning and deprovisioning. You don't have to wait months to add an additional host. It's a matter of minutes. These are dedicated, isolated, bare metal infrastructure instances for you and your company or your customer. Then you've got redundancy and placement control, plus security and encryption. So let's start digging deeper by talking about what the deployment looks like from a high level. These are the steps you'll take when you deploy a software-defined data center through the Azure portal. You'll deploy the private cloud inside of the Azure portal. You'll then create a virtualized network or a VNet. You'll create an Azure Bastion and then a jump host. You'll create a gateway subnet and a VNet gateway inside the VNet. Then you'll create an auth key in the VNet gateway, and you'll connect the AVS Express route to the VNet gateway. This is actually what connects your AVS environment into Azure outright. From there, you'll need to connect VMware on-prem to AVS in Azure. You'll connect to the jump host behind the Azure Bastion service. You'll connect to vCenter via a web browser. Then you'll connect to NSXT. You'll need to enable global reach for on-premises access. So the pattern here is an ExpressRoute circuit gets deployed with AVS. In order to have that full pattern of network connectivity from on-prem reach AVS, you need global reach. You'll then join the VCSA to your domain and configure an identity source. Of course, I'm simplifying the process a little bit here, as each step is a bit more involved and takes some planning. But the concepts are straightforward enough to understand from a customer's point of view. There are configuration changes you make in Azure, and then corresponding configuration changes you make on premises to build a truly hybrid solution that extends your VMware footprint into Azure. This is the actual reference architecture I talked about. So you've got the Azure Bastion subnet inside the VNet. You've got the Jumpbox subnet inside the virtual network that you've connected with your AVS environment using the ExpressRoute connection point related to peering. The jump host is able to access vCenter and the NSX manager. And you don't have any jump host that has a public IP with the ability to RDP into that Windows machine. So this is an architecture pattern you will most likely want to adopt because of the way that it will allow your environment to be locked down and you don't have a VM sitting in Azure with a public IP that is RDP enabled. Let's move into the network architecture next. So network interconnectivity between your Azure VMware Solution private cloud and on-prem environment or virtual networks in Azure enables you to access and use your private cloud. There are two types of AVS private cloud interconnectivity. There's basic interconnectivity, which enables you to manage and use your private cloud with only a single virtual network in Azure, and then the full on-premises to private cloud interconnectivity, which extends the virtual network connectivity to also include interconnectivity between on-premises environments and AVS private clouds. AVS private clouds require a minimum of a /22 site or network address block for subnets. This network topology should complement your on-premises network. In order to connect the on-premises environments and virtual networks, the recommended pattern is to make sure there are no overlapping network address block segments. The diagram showcases basic interconnectivity. This implementation is best suited for AVS evaluations or implementations that don't require network access from on-premises environments using ExpressRoute. Think of this as maybe a starter version of interconnectivity and network access. There's logical ExpressRoute-based networking between a virtual network in Azure and a private cloud. The interconnectivity fulfills three of the primary use cases: inbound access to vCenter and the NSXT manager that is accessible from VMs in your Azure subscription and not from on-premises systems. Additionally, this provides outbound access from VMs to Azure services, as well as inbound access and consumption of workloads running in a private cloud. To establish full interconnectivity to a private cloud from on-premises, you need to enable ExpressRoute global reach between a private cloud ExpressRoute circuit and an on-premises ExpressRoute circuit. This ExpressRoute circuit sits in your subscription and isn't a part of the AVS private cloud deployment. The on-premises ExpressRoute circuit is beyond the scope of this conversation, but know that if you require on-premises connectivity to your private cloud, you can use an existing ExpressRoute circuit or purchase an ExpressRoute circuit within the Azure portal. Once you've linked the on-prem ExpressRoute circuit to the AVS ExpressRoute circuit using global reach, the two ExpressRoute circuits will route network traffic between your on-premises environments and your private cloud using BGP. To enable full connectivity, an authorization key and private peering ID for global reach can be requested in the Azure portal. You use the key and ID to establish global reach between an ExpressRoute circuit in your subscription and the ExpressRoute circuit for your new private cloud. The routing requirements of the solution require you to plan private cloud network address spaces so that you avoid overlaps with other virtual networks and on-premises networks. This implementation enables the following use cases: hot or cold cross vCenter vMotion, and on-premises to AVS cloud management access. AVS also supports a VPN connectivity pattern. This is primarily used for POC environments where you need site-to-site connectivity. Maybe you're waiting on your ExpressRoute circuit. The big piece here is the migration over a site-to-site VPN is not backed by an SLA with VMware. So if you need dedicated SLA-backed guarantees, you'll need to factor in having that ExpressRoute circuit from on-prem into Azure. Next, let's talk through what the migration scenario looks like if you use AVS. There's some pre-migration steps and there's a whole process involved with onboarding AVS. First, you'll want to assess your VMware environment. That becomes helpful to figure out exactly what you have within your environment on premises. From there, that'll help you identify the workloads to migrate. You'll be able to define a migration approach using HCX. You can migrate using live, bulk, or cold migration patterns. From there, you'll be able to identify steps to full production. Once you've done the solution assessment side of this, you'll be able to move to the testing and validation phase. This is where the POC is built. This is where you create a private cloud. You move a few VMs using the preferred migration type. And this helps you get a handle of what it's going to look like once you go to full production. Then the actual final phase is a transition to production, which is where you perform at-scale migration and adoption of Azure VMware Solution. You can use Microsoft Fast Track. We also have a lot of support from certified partners. Azure Migrate now supports assessments for Azure VMware Solution, providing even more options for customers to plan their migration path into Azure. Previously, Azure Migrate tooling provided support for migrating Windows and Linux servers to Azure virtual machines living in an IaaS world. Newer features of Azure Migrate include database migrations, web application migrations, virtual desktop scenarios, and Azure VMware Solution. Customers can now use the same migration hub to assess machines for migrating to Azure VMware Solution. Using the Azure Migrate Server Assessment tool, customers can analyze readiness, Azure suitability, cost planning, performance-based right sizing, and application dependencies for migrating to AVS. The AVS assessment feature reached GA earlier in the year, March of 2021. The solution supports up to 35,000 VMware servers in one Azure Migrate project. When customers think about a migration pattern into Azure, they will lean on Hybrid Cloud Exchange, or HCX, to migrate into Azure. This migration pattern supports a live migration without the cost, complexity, or risk of refactoring. There's very minimal downtime in this migration effort, moving a VM from an on-premises vSphere environment into Azure VMware Solution. Customers are able to extend their proven tools, skills, and policies without having to change much of anything related to their operational workflow. This eliminates the need and the cost of reskilling. Hybrid Cloud Exchange enables migration of your VMware workloads to the cloud or other connected sites through various built-in HCX-supported migration types. HCX can support large-scale bulk migration of VMs. VMware HCX Replicated Assistant vMotion uses the HCX Interconnect appliance along with replication and vMotion technologies to provide large-scale parallel migrations with zero downtime. HCX also supports any vSphere to vSphere migration pattern, which adds extra functionality. It's not just a migration pattern into Azure. It's really sort of the Swiss Army knife of the VMware environment related to migrations. HCX can be part of a site pairing and DR, which means high availability will follow your app around, regardless of any disasters, user errors, or equipment failure. HCX offers parallel VM migration threads, which helps speed up the process and helps it feel less single-threaded in terms of a migration. It helps you plan out and plot what that migration pattern is going to look like without having to account for a very long period of time in terms of downtime. HCX does not require an IP address change, and there's no NAT involved either, so this really starts to become an easy conversation with customers that need their IP addresses to not change during the migration efforts. And then HCX itself provides a secure proxy for vMotion and replication traffic to appease the security-minded companies. HCX allows you to extend layer 2 networking, so both your on-prem environment and AVS will have the same IP address. If this is a want on the part of your company, you'll need to factor this deployment model into the overall approach of moving your VMs out of your on-premises data center. In order to set this up, global reach should be configured between on-premises and the Azure VMware Solution software-defined data center express route circuit. All required ports should be open between on-premises and the Azure VMware Solution SDDC. You'll need one IP address for the HCX manager on-premises and a minimum of 2 IP addresses for the Interconnect and Network Extension appliance. The on-premises HCX Interconnect and Network Extension appliances should be able to reach vCenter and the ESXi infrastructure in Azure. To deploy the WAN Interconnect appliance, in addition to the /22 CIDR network address block used for the SDDC deployment in the Azure portal, HCX requires a /29 block. This will be another piece to factor in related to the network planning for AVS. Next, let's talk through management and operations. The beauty of running VMware in Azure is you and your team will already be extremely familiar with all of the VMware tools and technology. After all, it's VMware on Azure. Using AVS allows you to create operational consistency for admins, since you'll use the vSphere client to access your cluster, all VMs, and the NSXT manager. Access to vSphere, HCX, and NSXT are enabled during the private cloud deployment process in Azure. Credentials are registered in Azure to connect to the private cluster. There's an ability to easily scale the infrastructure to match business needs through the Azure portal. Another thing to note is if you can do it in the portal, there's a REST API equivalent. So you could even think about automating some of this scale when you need it. You can add new nodes as required to increase compute and storage during peak times, which provides you a lot of flexibility. You can also delete nodes when demands are lower. The math is called out in this slide. You need a minimum of 3 nodes per cluster, there's a maximum of 16 nodes in a vSphere cluster, and there's a maximum of 96 nodes to an Azure Private Cloud instance. Often, we show where the division of responsibility lies between the customer and Microsoft associated to the shared responsibility model in terms of Azure. The model itself is related to Azure All Up and looks somewhat similar. However, this chart focuses on the lines of responsibility for Azure VMware Solution itself. As you can see, Microsoft abstracts a lot of the ongoing maintenance, security, management, etc., leaving your company in charge of things that matter most: guest OS provisioning, applications, and virtual machines. Plus, you get to think through your own lifecycle process and configuration management techniques which can be brought to Azure. With this model, certain types of operational pain points go away by placing your platform on Azure and running your VMware vSphere infrastructure in the cloud. You can manage your AVS private cloud within the Azure portal. There's a section within the AVS resource that talks about the different components you can configure. There's a section for connectivity, which handles things like ExpressRoute, HCX, and global reach. Then there's identity. This displays the vCenter web client URL. It'll highlight the vCenter admin user. You'll copy the admin password. Same with NSXT. This is abstracted in the portal. Then you can think about increasing your node count within the clusters. That's what clusters would handle. Underneath workload networking, this is where the Simplified Nsx Interface lies. You can control your NSXT segments, your DHCP server or relay. You can set up port mirroring for troubleshooting. And you can think about creating things like a DNS zone as well. In terms of access, once you're in the vCenter environment, you can use the jump host that you'll configure behind the Azure Bastion, Or you can also use things like PowerCLI and PowerShell. You will use the Cloud Admin account. Think of this like the administrator at vSphere.local account you used to use when you'd set up your vCenter environment on-prem. It looks exactly the same. There are a number of integrations as well. These are some of the popular Azure VMware Solution integrations at the moment. There's Azure NetApp Files for a file share, using Azure Blob Storage for things like your content library, presenting web apps with Azure Traffic Manager or Azure Application Gateway. There's support for hub and spoke topology related to network connectivity. Then there's the Azure Backup Server, as well as Azure Monitor, and then Azure Security Center and Azure Sentinel. This is a high-level overview of a workload integration. You have your Azure VMware Solution software-defined data center at the lower left. Once all of that lives in Azure and those environments are live, you can bring about Azure Automation for automation tasks, as well as Azure Update Management to handle your patch management. You can build a log analytics workspace that'll help you related to Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center, and Azure Sentinel. Once you bring your workloads into Azure, you gain a lot more access to the cloud-native features that help out the operational sides of every enterprise. In terms of data protection, Azure Backup is another common integration. Microsoft Azure Backup Server, or MABS for short, can be used to back up AVS running workloads. MABS Server is deployed on an Azure IaaS VM and it connects to AVS through the express route circuit for the SDDC. This is a quick high-level overview of what the architecture looks like. There's the Azure Recovery Services Vault. That will talk to the MABS server that lives in the Azure VNet you provisioned and connected to your AVS environment. The express route handles network traffic routing between the Azure VNet as well as the AVS private cloud instance. And you're able to back up those servers. First, you'll back it up locally for a day or a series of days, and then all of that data will be offloaded to the Azure Recovery Services Vault based upon your preference in terms of data protection. If Azure Backup isn't something you're interested in today, there are third-party backup solutions you could consider using. There's functionality of using Commvault, Veritas, and Veeam at the present time. More vendors are being certified as well. Let's talk a little bit about the support structure. So Microsoft support is your single point of contact. You don't have to open up a support ticket with VMware and a separate ticket for Microsoft. Microsoft will handle all of the Azure-based troubleshooting. Engineers will course correct anything that might be wrong inside the Azure realm. If it's related to vSphere specifically, Microsoft will work in conjunction with VMware to resolve. So Azure VMware Solution is validated, supported, and certified by VMware and Microsoft. Microsoft is your first contact and will make decisions based upon the problem type. Azure-related issues are addressed by Microsoft. When VMware support is required, Microsoft coordinates with VMware for product-specific support, and Microsoft will continue to be your central point of resolution. We have a handful of resources that have come to light in hopes of helping folks gain the extra skills to deploy Azure VMware Solution within their environment. There are a number of hands-on labs that VMware is hosting. There are 2 online at the moment. The first hands-on lab involves deployment and connectivity for your Azure VMware Solution environment. The second lab deals with workload migration by using VMware HCX. Microsoft is also in the middle of building Learn modules. We have 1 module up at the moment, and we are working on additional modules. Here are a number of URLs to check out when you get some time. Everything from the AVS overview to the AVS documentation link. We have some Azure VMware Solution videos that are up. There are a number of VMware ports and protocols you'll want to take a look at if you have a restrictive environment. Then there's the HCX documentation, as well as the HCX release notes for what we have deployed inside of AVS. And then there's the Azure Migrate documentation as well. That's been updated for AVS assessments. Let's flip over to the Azure portal. In order to create an Azure VMware Solution resource, you can click on Create a Resource. You can search for it here. Grab it this way. You could also search for it here. Create it this way. Now there are a handful of them deployed within the subscriptions that I am a part of. In order to create it brand new, it's as simple as clicking on Add, tying it to the right subscription. Now I already have this deployed inside my subscription. If you go the route of trying to deploy this inside your own, this little bit here indicates exactly everything you need to do. You need an enterprise agreement, or you need a cloud solution provider agreement plan. And then prior to creating the Azure VMware Solution Private Cloud, you'll have to review the process for node allocation, which is as simple as clicking on here, and you'll go into the docs itself, right? It's as simple as opening up a support ticket, asking for host allocation, and it will take up to potentially 5 days. Usually it's much faster. So that's helpful in the event you start building this and maybe you didn't go through this process. You'll want to align it to a resource group, and this is in North Central. You'll give it a name, so we'll give it AVS North Central. Now since I already have it deployed, this won't populate correctly, but when you grab the SKU, it's only the AV36 node. And then you'll specify the amount of hosts. You'll type in an address block, so 10.6.0.0, remember it's a /22. And then this is the management network AVS uses. You need to tie it to an Azure VNet. So you can create a brand new one, or you can tie it to an existing VNet. Now remember, the VNet has to have a gateway subnet. So you can always leave this blank too and just tie it after the fact, tie it together. You can create a new one in here, and it indicates it requires the gateway subnet inside the descriptions here. So there's a lot of helpful guidance as you build this out, and then you can place tags on the resource if you need to, but it's as simple as hitting review and create, waiting for those validation steps to occur, and then you build the resource. Now the AVS instance takes about 2.5 or 3 hours to provision, so I won't go through that process today, but I will instead click on an existing environment, and I'll start walking you through what it looks like. So this has been deployed. Right? The status is succeeded. It's got 3 ESXi hosts. Now remember, you can leave that virtual network blank when you build out the resource, or you can tie it to a virtual network. When I built this instance, I tied it to a virtual network, so Azure automatically tied it to the express route. It did the carving up of the subnets. This is the primary peering subnet. This is the secondary peering subnet. This is the private cloud management network, and this is the vMotion network. I did not specify anything. All I specified was that /22 network, and I tied it to a virtual network that actually is 10.0.0.0/16. Just like a lot of other Azure resources, you've got your activity log, your IAM controls, your tags, your diagnose and solve problems, as well as locks. I'm not going to go through that. It's pretty much like every other Azure resource. I instead want to talk a little bit about connectivity. Now I have Azure Mask on, so you won't see some of the sensitive information once it shows up here. But these are the management sides of things that you're able to control in the portal. This is your vMotion network. This is your private cloud management network. You have capacity to copy it. This is your express route circuit. This was actually configured during deployment. This I have not yet configured, but I have done so with a screenshot, so that's where all these keys would sit. This is your HCX environment, right? The plan right now is HCX Advanced. You can always open up a support ticket and change that to HCX Enterprise. You can enable a public IP on the environment. This will help related to any sort of web hosts or web servers that need to be publicly accessible. And this is where you configure global reach. This is where you'll add the connections. You'll specify the resource group, the express route circuit, or you could tie it to a circuit ID, and you'll provide the authorization key that you requested in the express route section. So this is how you handle the network connectivity side of things. Identity is the next piece. And remember, I've got Azure Mask installed, so it won't show the sensitive information. But this is the web URL. This is the admin username. It's that cloudadmin@vsphere.local. This is the way that you copy the password. So prior to this change, you had to reset your password every 90 days with support. That was a little cumbersome and problematic because sometimes folks would miss that 90-day window. So now we've got capacity for this to be handled 100% by Azure. So I will walk through what it looks like when you go into the environment, but you'll copy the password and you'll provide it to the website that you're logging into. This is the certificate thumbprint. Same down here with the NSXT manager credentials. You've got your web client URL, your admin username, your admin password, and the certificate thumbprint. You can add additional clusters, or you can add nodes to your cluster. This is all automated. This all can be automated with Azure Automation or PowerShell or the AZ CLI. I'll just move this slider bar up. Should be able to move it to 4. And then I can hit save and it will update. This takes approximately 25 to 30 minutes to provision, which is much faster than when you would add nodes on premises. Down here is the Simplified Networking Interface. I only have one networking segment. This is the HCX uplinked segment, but it was as simple as adding the segments in here, tying it to the gateway, specifying any DHCP ranges if you need to, and clicking on OK. This is where you would set up a DHCP server or a DHCP relay. Sometimes folks don't choose to statically assign IP addresses within their VMware workloads. This is how you'll handle it inside of AVS once workloads live inside the environment. You can set up port mirroring if you need to. You can set up VM groups or just port mirroring profiles. And then you can set up DNS zones or a DNS service here as well. The rest of the sections here follow suit to most Azure resources, so I won't spend any time talking about that. I'll next go into the AVS environment. So let's go back to the resource group. And inside this resource group, I've got a lot of resources deployed. This is the jump host I'm using to access my AVS environment. And you'll see here there's no public IP address. So I will click on Connect, and I will use the Azure Bastion because that actually is deployed in the environment. This is the Bastion that I've provisioned. So I'll connect using Azure Bastion. I don't have just in time, but if you wanted to, you could lean on that and add extra security for your VMs that are jump hosts. Click on Use Azure Bastion. That's the username I've provisioned. Let me grab the password real quick here. I can never remember it. So I'm connecting through the Bastion host to the Windows server that's acting as the jump host. I'm going to open up Microsoft Edge. I'm going to flip back here to the resource group. I'm going to go back into the AVS instance. I'm going to go down to connectivity. Let's go to the vSphere URL. Let's paste this in. It looks very similar to every other vCenter instance. I will click through there. I'll cancel this out. Let's grab the admin username, cloudadmin@vsphere.local. Let's grab the password. And then I'm in the instance. So it's just like every other vCenter instance. You've got all of the different components related to configuration and management over here on the left. You can go into HCX pretty easily. When we logged in, that was where my last session left me. This is your host and clusters view. I didn't name any of this. Azure did that on behalf of the provisioning of my AVS instance. And then these are the hosts that live there. I can add an additional fourth host. If I need more, I need to open up a ticket. Your VMs and templates would show up here. I don't have any VMs or templates just yet. It's a newer environment. This is the vSAN data store. This is all of the networking, which is handled within NSXT. Let's flip back to the portal. Let's grab the NSXT information next. Let's open up a different browser window or a tab. Let's grab the username. Whoops, it's not the username. It's admin for VMware's NSXT manager. It's a little different. Let's grab the admin password. And now we're inside of NSXT. And it's just like the VMware's NSXT on-prem. You've got your networking section, your security section, inventory, some of the troubleshooting that's been exposed inside of the Azure portal. You can go in here and drill down even further. And that's the beauty of AVS. You can either choose to use the Azure portal or you can use NSXT Manager directly. This will give you all the configurations surrounding the system itself, and then advanced networking and security. So that's kind of a cool bit here. You're able to configure what you need to configure. Now there's certain things you won't be able to configure. There's certain things that Microsoft abstracts, but there's still some configuration you can help out with related to east-west traffic. Let's go in here to HCX. And you see we've got the deployment here sitting in the Chicago area. It's in North Central. You can set up your site pairing. I don't have anything set up at the moment. You can set up a service mesh. Once the service mesh is set up, you can create the network extension. This is the migration section where you would actually take into consideration VMs on-prem and migrate that into AVS. And this is the disaster recovery section where you're able to think about failing VMs over with minimal effort. There's a little bit of administration that you might have to think through. If you ever see an update, you'll have to push the update through. And this is how you'll grab information for support if Microsoft asks and you're experiencing problems. So that rounds out the demo. As you can see, it's a vSphere instance inside of Azure. You know it's inside of Azure because you see things like northcentralus.avs.azure.com. So it's a great way to think about speeding up your digital transformation. And with that, I want to thank you for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to contact the folks involved with Cloud Lunch and Learn. They'll be able to pass any messages along to me. And definitely stay tuned to the rest of the event. There's a lot of good content that will help you make sense of what a digital transformation might look like for you and your company. Thanks.